welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. For today's case, we're going all the way to the Western Cape in both Strand and Mitchell's Plain. On the 12th of March 1994, 10-year-old Eroy van Roy and his cousin Rhino decided to go to the local shopping centre in Strand just to try and earn a couple of money, helping push trolleys and just things like that. So as they were busy throughout the day, they got really tired and hungry, so they decided to go take a break and just go to the local cafe just to buy some food. And as they were there, they went to the arcade and they were just walking around the arcade when a man approached them. This man gave them a couple of money just to enjoy the arcade games as they wait for their food, and they did this, and after playing a couple of games they went back to the cafe to go get their food. They ate their food, and when they finished, the same man approached them. He offered them 10 rand to help him carry some boxes to the train station, and they accepted. It was 10 rand, it's a lot of money, and they just didn't see anything wrong with it. However, when they were halfway to the train station, Rhino got a very bad feeling about this man. He noticed that the boxes they were carrying were empty. So he decided to tell Eroy about the bad feelings he had, and they also spoke about the fact that there had been a serial killer in the Western Cape. And Eroy just told him that no, it's happening in Mitchell's Plain, not in Strand, so they really shouldn't worry. He didn't think anything much of it, but Rhino did, so he just decided to leave and go home. Eroy wouldn't make it home that night. His body would be found a week later in Rivier, which is about 22 kilometers away from Strand. He would have been the 23rd victim of the serial killer known as the Station Strangler. The Station Strangler had been terrorizing community members from Mitchell's Plain from as early as 1986. Jonathan Claston was just 14 years old when his body was found on the 3rd of October 1986. It was found at Modderdam railway station, and he had been sodomized, his hands tied behind his back and his face flat down in the sand. The cause of death was strangulation with his own clothing, and this would go on to be the cause of death of all the Station Strangler's victims. Before the 1990s rolled in, another 8 victims would be found. Yusuf Hufferman was just 10 years old, and his body was found on the 7th of January 1987 in Rocklands. Mario Thomas was just 13 years old, and his body was discovered 16 days later in Rivier. The 4th body of the Station Strangler remains unidentified to this day. His body was found in April 1987. 12-year-old Freddie Cleves would be found just 2 months later at Balhar Station, as well as Samuel Ngoba, who was 15 years old. He was found that December. The 7th victim also remains unidentified to this day. His body was found at Modderdam railway station in October 1987. He was found almost exactly to the same day as the first victim in the same location. Calvin Speerer was just 9 years old when his life was tragically taken by the Station Strangler. His body was found at Unibal Station near Balhar on the 8th of February 1988. Sandra Gauzy was the last victim of the Station Strangler from the 1980s. He was just 11 years old when his body was found at Schaefer Station. The cases had all been assigned to one detective, but because they hadn't received any formal training about serial killers and things of that sort, he really didn't connect the cases despite them having the same MO or having been found in relatively the same location or the exact same location. So because of this, nothing was done. So the cases were basically just left sitting there untouched. As the 90s began, the Station Strangler had already claimed the lives of 9 boys. It seemed as though he took a 2-year hiatus before he returned in October 1992. He returned to Mitchell's Plain and took the life of 11-year-old Jacob Slew in October 1992. After this, he took another 1-year hiatus and returned. The body of an unidentified child was found on the 13th of January 1994 in Veldefjorder Dunes. So the dunes are basically just remote and ice and desolate, and they're surrounded with vegetation as well as marsh. So it's really hard to see anything in that area. unless you literally walking through it or looking for something specifically. Illness Sprinkle was found in the dunes on the 20th of January 1994. He was just 11 years old. Donovan's source was found just 5 days later. Donovan had been the adopted son of Stella Jafter, who had later reported that she searched for her 10-year-old son for 2 days before she went to the police. When she attempted to file a missing persons report, the police officer on duty just told her that a lot of children are going missing in the area, they don't know where to look, so she should just continue looking on her own. Stella would later find out about the murder of her son on TV. She was watching the news when a cameraman was pointing towards the dunes, basically just saying that they had found another body of a little boy. As soon as she saw the pants as well as the red and white striped t-shirt, she knew that it was Donovan. Fortunately, the body had already been removed from the scene and it was only the clothes left. On the same day Donovan's body was found, just 20 meters away, Jeremy Benjamin's body was found. Jeremy's family didn't know he was missing until a week later, and this is just because he would move from different homes. So he would go to his mother's home in Mitchell's Plain, his father's home in Stellenbosch, some friends' homes in Massacre, and his grandmother's home in Eersterivier. This was the 90s and technology isn't what it is today, so everyone just thought that he was with someone else, and because they couldn't communicate as easily as we could today, no one really knew that he was missing. The discovery of so many bodies in such a short period of time left the community in a frenzy, and they demanded that local authorities do something about it. They then decided to conduct their own search of the dunes, and after this, police officers decided to have a formal search. It included them, the army, as well as community members that wanted to join in. 8 bodies would be found. Jeremy Smith was just 13 years old at the time of his murder. Marcelina Caputo was 9 years old, and he had been visiting his grandmother with his other siblings when his father sent his mother to go collect them, and he was really enjoying his time being with his grandmother and he didn't want to go home. So his mother was a bit reluctant to let him stay behind, but eventually she agreed, gave him 50 cents to buy a couple of sweets, and this would be the last time that she saw him. She would later identify his clothes, and his father would be the one to identify his body. Neville Samai was just 14 years old when his body was discovered during that weekend search, alongside the body of an unidentified child as well as an unidentified adult. This would also be the only adult victim of the station Strangler. Fabian Wilmore and Owen Hofmeister were best friends. They were found lying next to each other in the dunes. Fabian was just 8 years old and he had been strangled with Owen's pants. Owen was 11 years old and he had been strangled with Fabian's underwear. At the time, Owen's mother's house was full of people, so she didn't notice that her son was missing, and so one night she was dishing up for everyone and only one plate remained untouched. The last body to be found that weekend would be of an unidentified child. His body was found redressed with his underwear next to him, and forensic detectives later said that it is as though the killer would redress most of his victims, and this was basically just to try and undo his killings. For some reason, he felt guilty afterwards. After the discovery of all these bodies, a 14-man task team was established. This task team was known as the Station Strangler Squad. As soon as this task team was established, they received thousands and thousands of tips, and within 3 months, they already interrogated about 2,000 suspects. They didn't go anywhere and they didn't have any new information to go on, and the community was just very displeased with their efforts and decided to take matters into their own hands. They had protests, and during one of these protests, they almost burned down a police station. They would also go to people's homes that they thought were the station Strangler and terrorize them, and basically just took the law into their own hands. And on many occasions, police officers would have to go to those houses and rescue those people from the community, and would often find them like on the roof trying to get away from the large crowd. A profile of the killer was then created. It was said that he was between 25 and 30 years old, most likely of the same race, and lived in the same community. He had a position of authority, maybe that of a social worker, a teacher, or a police officer. He still lived with his family, he was homosexual, and he enjoyed the company of children over that of adults. He was extremely intelligent, bilingual at the least, and he would have been able to like dress really, really well. And he was most likely sexually molested as a child by another family member. So because police officers had nothing to go on, they decided to release this profile to the media. In March, they received their first eyewitness, and she claims to have seen Ilroy walking with a man. She says that this man had an afro and had a scar on his face as well. In April, they received a call from a psychiatric nurse, and she had picked up a newspaper and seen the sketch that they had drawn of the suspect, and she just told them that she thought that they had a client in the clinic. Norman Simmons, later known as Avzal Simons, after his temporary conversion to the Muslim faith, was born on the 12th of January 1967 in Greenpoint, Cape Town. Norman was a product of an interracial relationship which would have been illegal at the time. He had a very tumultuous upbringing. When he was a toddler, he moved to the Eastern Cape to live with his grandparents, and after this, he moved around between family members, so in the Eastern Cape, in Joburg, as well as Durban. When he was a teenager, he finally moved back to Cape Town to live with his mother, his stepfather, as well as his older brother. Norman's fit the profile like a glove. He was unmarried, still lived at home, was a teacher. He was extremely intelligent. He spoke 7 languages, and he just helped out in the community and was just very well known and very well respected. Simmons also claims to have been sexually assaulted as a teenager by his older brother. After police officers received this tip from the psychiatric nurse, they decided to bring Norman in and try and interrogate him. Once he got to the police station, he just asked police officers for a pen and paper and decided to write his life story for them. And he only finished this late at night, so he stayed the night in one of like the buildings at the police station, and then he was released the next morning because they had nothing to hold him on. On the morning of the 13th of April 1994, Norman Simmons was arrested in connection with all 22 murders of the station Strangler, except for that of Ilroy van Roy, and this is because police officers said that they didn't have enough evidence to pin him against that murder at that particular moment. Later that day, police officers said that they had nothing to hold him on, so he was released, but he was rearrested shortly afterwards for the murder of Ilroy. During his initial first days in custody, Norman confessed and said that he had been murdering children from as early as 1986. He would later retract the statement only to confess again. He also told police officers that they could take him to the scenes of the crime so that he could point out where specific bodies were found. So they decided to do this, and just to ensure that he wasn't influenced by other police officers that were involved in the case, they decided to get another police officer that didn't have much knowledge about the case. So in the morning, they went to all of these locations, and Norman was basically just pointing out the locations of the bodies, and he also pointed them to another location, and told them that they could find a body there. Police officers searched and they didn't find anybody, but they did find the clothes of a young boy. They would later say that there are like scavenger dogs in that area, so it is likely that they would eat the remains of a human, but I don't think it's that likely that there would be like nothing left, like no bones, or even like, I don't know, like there wouldn't be nothing. Norman claims that the murders are a result of 2 factors. The first one is that when he was still living in the Eastern Cape, he was cursed by an older woman. And the second factor is that his older brother's voice is basically in his head telling him to murder children. I should also mention that his older brother was murdered. Some sources say that he was murdered in 1991, other sources say 1993, but I couldn't find any more information about it. After this, Simmons was taken for a psychiatric evaluation, and it was discovered that he had depression as well as several personality disorders, but he could still withstand trial. Mike Stowe, the prosecutor that would take Normans to trial for the murder of Elroy, later said that at the mention of his brother's name, Normans would just go into some transition, like he would speak in tongues, and his physical appearance would also change. And he'd bring in other investigators to see this, just to make sure that he's not going crazy. And it was really something that he took note of and thought it was just very odd and strange. Simmons wrote in one of his confessions, "I am nothing. I am dirty. I am filthy and not worthy. I'm sorry for letting you down. Don't get caught in the same thing. I really regret everything. It's hard to be possessed by unknown forces. These forces cannot be explained by medication. I salute you with love for a better and understanding and peaceful South Africa." Due to the advanced state of decomposition of the bodies, DNA evidence really couldn't be extracted or matched to Simmons. It was the 90s, it was 1994, and DNA technology isn't what it is today, but they were able to keep some samples, maybe for future reference. Police had nothing to tie Simmons to the original murders, but they did believe that they would be able to try him for the murder of Elroy, and this is because they had an eyewitness. They had brought in the eyewitness to basically have an identity parade where they just put several men in a room and she would just point out who she thinks she saw. So she pointed out Norman's, even though some people believe that she really wasn't convinced, and she did mention the fact that that Norman's had short hair and the person that she saw had an afro. As much as the community was relieved that police officers finally had someone in custody for the station Strangler murders, they were shocked to see who it was. Normans was well respected in the community, his pupils loved him, some parents loved him, and there was one point where one of his students had undergone open heart surgery and he decided to go sit with her or him in a hospital and just relieve their mother so that she could go home and just rest for a couple of hours. But despite this, other teachers also started putting two and two together and thought that he was the station strangler. This is because at school during breaks, they would ask the male teachers to basically just parole the school to just see for any dodgy things, just see if things were out of the ordinary, and Simmons refused to do this. During class times, they would have to lock their classroom doors, and Simmons refused to do this as well, and would also go to all the classroom doors, knock on it, and start screaming, "Open up, it's the Strangler." Donovan Swartz's mother claims that even though her son didn't go to the same school that Simmons taught at, he knew who Simmons was. She says that Donovan would often play cricket with him, and Simmons would take him as well as other children to the beach. On one occasion, he came home with 2 cricket bats and 2 cricket balls, and when Donovan's mother asked him where he had gotten these from, he said that he had gotten them from Mr. Simmons. The trial of Norman Simmons began on the 27th of February 1995. The police were accused of finding the first person that fit the profile. On the 15th of June 1995, Norman Simmons was found guilty of the murder of Elroy van Roy, and he was sentenced to 25 years for his murder and 10 years for kidnapping. Normans did not stop proclaiming his innocence and also sent Elroy's grandmother a letter just basically telling her that he is not the person that murdered her grandson. In 1998, Simmons appealed his case. However, his sentence was just increased to life. If you thought that was the end of this case, you were sadly mistaken. In 2005, there was an inquest held into the murders by the station Strangler between 1986 to 1994, and it was discovered that police officers, it's not that they didn't have enough evidence, it's just that the evidence didn't match Simmons. Because it was 2005, DNA technology had improved greatly, and because of this, they were able to test the DNA evidence that they had found on some of the victims. Jeremy Smith's underpants had semen on it, and they tried to match this against Simmons, and it was not a match. Elroy van Roy also had semen on an item of clothing, and it did not match Simmons. They had also found a note in one of the victim's pockets, as well as a crossword puzzle that had been filled in, and using Simmons' handwriting, like they compared his handwriting to that found in the crossword puzzle and on the note, and those were also not a match. It was also said that Simmons had an alibi for the day that Leroy van Roy was murdered. He was seen in a library in Claremont at 2:30 in the afternoon, and it would have been impossible for him to make it to Strand at 4 p.m. for an eyewitness to see him walking with Leroy. It's also said that there was other witnesses. The first one saw Leroy on the train, and they say that he was just on the train and they greeted him, and there was no strange man around him or any strange man that they could see. And the second person says that they saw Leroy on the train, and Leroy told him that he was going to his aunt's house, and seemingly this man was also going to the same place. I don't know why they didn't just go together then, but yeah. The eyewitness was also put into question. There was a reward of 250,000 rand that was offered by the local supermarket, and she received this money after having called the police officers as an eyewitness, and she received the money before Simmons was convicted. In most cases where money is offered to any people that have information about the case, the money is only given to the person after the person has been convicted. But it seemed as though the community had already decided and tried Simmons for the murders, and because of this, it wasn't really ethical. Like, it wasn't right. The eyewitness was also further brought into doubt when it was said that she said that the person she saw with Leroy that day had an afro and Simmons had short hair. Also, there is a photo of Simmons on the same day that Leroy was kidnapped, and he basically went to the police station to go sign up to help with the searches of children. I think the searches of children by the station Strangler, and you had to take a picture once you signed up. So there was a picture of him that day, and also it's physically impossible for you to like have short hair and then grow it into an afro, unless maybe he wore a wig, but I think that's just weird. It's just weird, man. At the inquest, it was also heard that at one of the crime scenes, a VW Jetta was seen, and the witness also says that she heard screaming nearby the car. Simmons did not own any kind of car like this. Two men also came forward during the inquest and said that they believed that they were the first attempted victims of the station Strangler. They say that in the 1980s, they were basically approached by this man, and this man sodomized them, and they were able to get away. And at the time that this happened, they knew Norman Simmons, and they say that their attacker was not Norman Simmons. So it is a bit strange that a man would have like the same MO in the same area as the station Strangler, and it not be the person that people think it was. But yeah, we'll go back to that just now. The officer that had also taken Simmons to the crime scenes for him to point out also said that there were more inconsistencies than facts. Kevin Pretorius was one of Norman's friends, and he gave a statement to police saying that he had seen Donovan with Normans on numerous occasions, and that Normans would also tell Donovan to put his hands behind his back, and just, I don't know, because he was being like naughty or something, so he wanted to punish him by doing that. And that Normans had also told him previously that he used to murder children. He wasn't put on the stand during the trial because apparently before the trial began, his story had a lot of inconsistencies, so the prosecution didn't think that he would make a good witness. After this, he went out to the media and told them that he had basically been assaulted by police officers. They made him undress and forced him to tell them the story that they wanted to hear about Normans. After he made these claims, he was murdered outside of his house. His killer has never been found. The inquest continued for 3 years, and on the 9th of December 2008, the inquest was finally closed. They believe that basically there was evidence to suggest that Normans didn't kill all 23 boys, but he most likely killed at least 6 of them, and because of this they weren't gonna like reduce his sentence or anything, so he was sent back to continue the rest of his 35 years in prison. In 2014, one of the men that testified at the inquest came forward and basically just decided to tell the world his story, because he believed that things at the inquest just didn't go the right way, and he just didn't like the feeling it gave him. So basically he says that in the 1980s he and a friend were just walking when they were approached by a man, and this man offered them 10 rand to carry banana boxes. So as they were walking, they got to a remote area, and this man just fell to his knees and started choking them with a cord. After this, he basically just fell asleep and they were able to run away. And he also said that at the time he knew who Norman Simmons was, and his attacker was most definitely not Norman Simmons. In 2014, the station Strangler was going to be up for parole, so the case blew up once again. So on one of the radio stations, they were talking about this case when they received an unexpected call. They received a call from Mike Stowe, the prosecutor who had tried Norman Simmons for Eroy's murder, and he just said something that shocked the whole community, the whole country. He basically said that he didn't believe that Norman Simmons was the station strangler. He said that even during the trial in 1994, he had his doubts, but just decided to go forward, and he believes that if Norman's took the stand and just spoke about why he made a false confession and just basically defended himself, it would have had a different outcome. So it's basically just saying that, he just didn't feel right about it. Norman Simmons most likely didn't do this. And everyone was just shocked and surprised. It had been so many years since the trial. And I don't know, maybe he hoped that Norman Simmons would be granted parole by saying this. But yeah, in 2015, Norman Simons applied for parole. His application was declined. There was a moment of panic when a newspaper had gotten in contact with the Drakensberg Correctional Facility to get an upcoming comment about Norman Simmons' parole, when they told them that they weren't sure whether they still had him in their prison. And then a couple of days later, they called back to retract their statement and told them that, no, don't worry, we found him. I don't know how you lose a convicted serial killer in prison. How do you lose someone, or you're not sure whether they're still there or not? Ugh. In 2016, a self-proclaimed pedophile, Brian Schaefer, was found hanging in his cell at Lentegeur police station. Brian was 58 years old, and he had been convicted of numerous sexual assault cases from as early as the 1980s. In 2016, he had recently been arrested for the sexual assault of a 17-year-old boy that had been living with him since he was about 12 years old. Apparently, Brian had been released from prison in 2010, and he had a parole officer, and he claimed that he was basically a reformed pedophile, rehabilitated pedophile, whatever that is. And after this, he still managed to get a job at a primary school despite having had been convicted of sexual assault and having had a parole officer. Still managed to teach children. It was only for a couple of months, but still. He also set up basically a tutor thing where he would tutor children. He later told police officers that all the parents knew that he had been convicted before of sexual assault of a minor, and he says that the parents were fine with it, which was completely untrue. So basically, some people believe that Brian is the station strangler. This is because he fits the profile, he fits the profile almost exactly. The only difference is that he is white, but everything else is basically the same. He was between the ages of 25 and 30. He did live in Strand as well as Mitchell's Plain in the 1980s to the 1990s. He was a teacher, and he claims to have also been sexually molested by his uncle when he was a kid. And that is it for today's case. Please let me know what you guys think, whether you think it was Brian Schaefer, whether it was Norman Simmons and he was wrongly convicted, or it was someone completely different that the police officers didn't look into. This case was a lot, and it was a lot to take in, and I don't know, personally, I don't know what I think. It's just very confusing. So please let me know, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.